Right, so this video will just go through the final section of the mock, which is section D, and was obviously the program questions based on Dastan. So I'm not going to sort of spend too much time going through this in detail. I'll show you the mark scheme against which I was checking. Like I said, I did have to rush the marking for this one, so it's not been quite checked in the rigorous way it would be done in the exam. But hopefully I've come pretty close to giving you a rough estimate as to how you got on with the code that you've have completed. In terms of Dastan, obviously I think this at this point probably should be the sort of the lowest thing on your priority, perhaps in terms of final revision. But it's still worth spending maybe an hour on Saturday, an hour on Sunday, an hour on Monday morning, just running through, finishing off some of the exercises that you didn't complete in the test would be really good. And obviously you got all the sort of tasks that I've previously given you as well to complete. So but hopefully coming in this week and sort of working with it has just refreshed refresh your knowledge and of the application. So yeah, here was the first question, wasn't it? Which was a nice straightforward one. I think in the exam this is going to be worth something like this, probably worth about 4 marks. I think 2 marks was a little bit low, but I upscaled it to being out of 4. And so the modifications just needed to look like this, wasn't it? So if you entered the same name twice, it didn't accept it for player 2. So yeah, so there were kind of 2 bits to this. Hopefully in the exam it'll be a little bit clearer as to exactly what you need to supply in terms of screen, code and evidence. So there was a change here to the Dastan class you needed to make, which not everyone included, and I didn't discount you a mark for that because it wasn't necessarily clear that you had to sort of show that. But yeah, there's the call to the new method that you've made, create custom players, and then this bit was, by and large answered successfully. And I think possibly the only thing that sometimes people got a little bit confused of, because you were still in the Dastan class, you were able to just you had to remove 2 lines, didn't you? The 2 lines here where I added the player 1, player 2 name, and I have those lines within this subroutine. So where the player's name has been added effectively there, isn't it, with that read line, that input there. And then we're comparing it in this loop, aren't we, to see if when we do the second name, if these 2 match each other, then clearly we can't accept them, and we're just going to keep asking until they're different. So that was the method that was used. But once we get out that loop, of course, then we do need to store the player 2 name as well, and assign that. Okay, and the -1 and the +1 to indicate player 1, player 2 as well. That consistency just been mentioned. So they're the things to check for there, but by and large that was well done. The next one was the move for the Saruk. Is that how you pronounce it? The rocket. And again, a lot of people got well on with this and were very close to finishing it. These were the changes that I sort of ticked through, so kind of seeing the code added there. We didn't have any problems with people evidencing the right screenshots here as well. The code there. This was the bit which I haven't necessarily checked as rigorously as I should do. So if you want to just go through and just check you've got these parameter values correct, that define where the piece can move. But I think generally when on Wednesday's session I did check them a little bit more closely, and the values did seem to be matching up, which is good because it's showing that you understand the logic of how pieces move. And you can definitely imagine something like this coming up on Monday's paper, to define a new piece and add them in. Maybe as one of the earlier questions. So definitely worth spending some time getting your head around this if you're not happy with it. The video on YouTube also explains a little bit about how the piece moves works as well. So that's worth checking too. Okay, and then I was just looking in the screenshot really, so that I could see, in this instance, we've got the piece that's been moved here, which would be a valid move according to the definition, moving 2 spaces ahead. And then I think you had to include a second screenshot as well, where you move the opposing player's piece using the Saruk move as well. And I think the only issue that people had was the where was it? Adding to the queue where it needed to go in sort of second position, didn't it? I think the question stated it went in second position. So if we look at adding to player 1's queue, the second item to be on queued, Saruk, and then similar thing here for player 1 when we got to their queue, the second option. And Some people, if you had it at the bottom there, I think it stopped you from being able to actually then evidence a screenshot that it was working, which will have cost you an additional mark. But yeah, certainly a good thing to verify that you're happy with piece movement in the game. So possibly something that might come up on Monday. And then there were many questions. I know you didn't get onto them, so or many people didn't get onto them. So I'll just put the mark schemes up, and you can cross-reference and sort of see where my rough markers come from. So we've got the queue, haven't we, been able to spy on the opposing player's queue, and then this was like the breakdown of it, wasn't it? I think so. Here you go. There you go. So they've pressed option 8, which is the new option that you've programmed in, and that allows you to spy on player 2's queue. And the key thing with this one was just making sure you had a way of checking who the current player was, which I think it gave you a hint of actually for that method. And then that would allow you then to determine whether it was player 1 or player 2's queue that was required to spy, and obviously the update of the score as well being important. But I would say both of those questions are hopefully the kinds of things you might get as sort of like the sort of like the easier kind of Dastan sort of questions. I understand easy is a relative term, but the sort of thing that you might get asked to do maybe straight away in section D, or maybe even the second question in section D, if you're lucky. And I think the questions that then come after that, the last 2 questions, are going to be sort of up a notch in terms of difficulty. So hopefully this was definitely an example of that, but most of you won't have had a chance to look at it, but would be worth kind of working your way through, you know, as part of a revision exercise over the weekend. Yeah, and I think the other thing that's worth just pointing out with these kind of questions is that even if you don't get them fully working, do obviously submit the code. You know, this bit, for example, showing a valid menu and modifying a valid menu. There's no one in the class who's not capable of doing that, and you will get, you know, 1 or 2 marks for doing so. So even on the hard questions, do the parts of them that you can do, and you will get, you know, 1 or 2 marks for that. Okay, but yeah, that's the feedback for section D.